Ghosts and curses. It was a dark and stormy night. The wind howled, and the rain beat against the windows of the old mansion. Inside, a group of friends had gathered for a weekend getaway. But little did they know, they were about to experience something beyond their worst nightmares. As they sat around the fire, telling stories and sipping wine, one of them suggested they play a game of truth or dare. The group agreed, and they began to take turns asking each other questions and performing silly dares. But then it was Sally's turn. Sally was the quietest of the group, always keeping to herself. But tonight she seemed different. Her eyes were wide, and her hands were shaking as she asked for a dare. The others exchanged curious glances, but then decided to give her something simple. "I dare you to go up to the attic and find something spooky," said John, one of the more adventurous members of the group. Sally hesitated for a moment, but then stood up and made her way to the staircase leading to the attic. As she climbed the creaky stairs, she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She reached the top and pushed open the door to the attic, but what she saw made her freeze in terror. There, in the middle of the room, was a small figure with glowing red eyes. Its skin was pale and sickly, and it seemed to be staring directly at her. Sally tried to scream, but no sound came out. She stumbled backward, knocking over a pile of boxes and falling to the ground. The others rushed to her side, but when they looked up, the figure was gone. They searched the entire attic, but there was no sign of anyone or anything. As they tried to calm Sally down, they began to notice strange things happening throughout the mansion. Doors would open and close on their own. Footsteps could be heard coming from empty rooms, and a cold breeze seemed to follow them wherever they went. They tried to rationalize it all, blaming the old house and the storm outside, but deep down they knew something wasn't right. And then they remembered the legend of the mansion. According to the story, the mansion was built on top of an old cemetery, and the spirits of the dead were said to haunt its halls. Some even claimed to have seen a ghostly figure with glowing red eyes, much like the one Sally had seen in the attic. As the night wore on, the group became more and more afraid. They huddled together in the living room, trying to stay warm and safe, but the fear was too much to bear. And then they heard a sound coming from the basement. It was a low, guttural growl, like nothing they had ever heard before. They hesitated for a moment, but then John stood up and declared that they had to investigate. They made their way to the basement, flashlights in hand, but what they found was beyond their worst nightmares. In the center of the room was a large pit filled with bones and rotting flesh, and in the shadows, they could see the glowing eyes of dozens of creatures, watching them hungrily. They tried to run, but the creatures were too fast. They were surrounded, and there was no escape. And then, just as all hope seemed lost, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was the ghostly figure with the glowing red eyes. It moved towards them, and the creatures retreated into the shadows, cowering in fear. The figure stopped in front of them, and they could feel its icy breath on their faces. And then, it spoke. Its voice was like a whisper, but it echoed through the room. "Leave this place," it said, "or suffer the same fate." The group was frozen in fear, unsure of what to do next. But the figure with the glowing red eyes seemed to be waiting for a response. After a moment of hesitation, John spoke up. What do you want from us?" he stammered. The figure remained silent for a moment before answering in a cold, menacing tone. "I want you to leave this place and never return. This mansion is cursed, and anyone who enters its walls is doomed to suffer the same fate as those who came before." The group exchanged nervous glances, but they knew that they had to leave. They quickly made their way back up the stairs and out of the mansion, never looking back. As they drove away, they couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over them. They had come for a weekend getaway, but they had found something much more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. After that night, the group never spoke of their experience at the mansion again. But as the years went by, they began to notice strange things happening in their own lives. John, who had been the bravest of the group, started having nightmares about the glowing red eyes. He would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that the ghostly figure was watching him from the shadows. Sally, who had seen the figure first, began to withdraw from her friends and family. She would spend hours locked away in her room, whispering to herself and staring blankly at the wall. And the others, who had all thought that they had escaped the mansion unscathed, began to experience strange phenomena. They would hear the sound of footsteps coming from empty rooms, doors would open and close on their own, and they could feel an icy breeze whenever they entered a dark room. They tried to ignore it, to rationalize it away as coincidence or imagination, but deep down, they knew that something was wrong. And then, one by one, they started to receive strange letters in the mail. The letters were all from the same sender, a mysterious figure who signed them only as the Keeper. In each letter, the Keeper would describe in detail the events of that fateful night at the mansion. He would recount their every fear and every moment of terror, as if he had been there with them. And then, at the end of each letter, he would give them a warning. "The curse of the mansion is upon you," he would write, "and there is no escaping your fate." The group tried to brush it off as a prank, but as the letters continued to arrive, they knew that they were in danger. They decided to hire a private investigator to look into the matter, but the results were chilling. The investigator discovered that the mansion had a dark history, one that went back hundreds of years. It had been built on top of an old cemetery, and the bodies of the dead had never been properly removed. Instead, they had been left to rot beneath the foundation of the house. As the group delved deeper into the history of the mansion, they discovered that many others had met a similar fate. People had disappeared without a trace, and strange occurrences were reported on the property. And then, one day, the group received a final letter from the Keeper. It was a simple message, but it sent shivers down their spines. "It's time to pay the price," it read. That night, the group was never seen again. Their friends and family searched for them, but they were gone without a trace. And the mansion on the hill remained, its dark history hidden behind its walls, waiting for its next victims.